Hi guys, as you expected from the title, I'm going to do a full exam review with May 24 IB Economics HL papers. If you have a particular interest in a certain paper for revision, do check the description box and find the timestamp for one. All right then, let's give it a go. Question number 1. The two questions are from the Unit 2 Microeconomics. It's safe to start your introduction with defining a few key terms mentioned in the prompt, such as perfect competition, abnormal profit, and short run. And in body 1, you can mainly focus on analyzing the business operation of perfect competition in the short run, along with its main features. Specifically, the analysis can delve into the way how a single firm in perfect competition can earn abnormal profit in the short run. When its average total cost is lower than its price, it can earn abnormal profit, and such can be illustrated with a side-by-side diagram, as you can see below. Next, you can move on to explain how things change in the long run. The explanation should be about how the characteristic of no barriers to entry it has allows new market supply in the long run, and how it reduces the market price until only normal profits are going to be made in the long run. Again, a side-by-side diagram can illustrate the market supply curve shifting to the right in the industry diagram and the firm's demand curve shifting down, showing the case where abnormal profits are eliminated. B. Using real-world examples, evaluate the view that firms will always seek to maximize their profits. Again, the intro can be smoothly started with definitions of terms like business objective, economic profit. First, the essay can have one main discussion point that is mainly agreeing to the view. You can draw attention on the idea that how a rational producer will rationally maximize profit where its marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and where the difference between total revenue and total cost is maximized. To be more specific, you can explain how it can be achieved either by raising the total revenue or decreasing the total cost. Perhaps a diagram showing a firm achieving maximum profit when there is the biggest gap between total revenue and total cost can work to illustrate the case. And lastly, as a real-world example, I can recommend you to use firms like Tesla, which recently announced a plan to lay off more than 10% of its workforce, mainly to decrease the cost and maximize its profit. Next discussion point is on the disagreement to the view. You can first explain how the goal of profit maximization is not always applicable to all firms, considering the examples of startups or social enterprises. And the discussion can go further to explain other alternative business goals, such as CSR, corporate social responsibility, revenue maximization, and satisficing. You can use a diagram showing a firm achieving either revenue maximization or satisficing. Before finishing the discussion, you should bring a real-world example. In this case, one company that can be used is Johnson & Johnson. The firm highly prioritizes corporate social responsibility as its business goal, and the firm focuses on reducing their environmental impact on the planet. So to do that, it prioritizes the cleaner way of using energy, etc. So you can check the detail to resonate your idea. Let me move on to the next question then. Question number 2. These are from the Unit 3 Macroeconomics. A. Using the Keynesian multiplier, explain how an increase in government spending can result in short-term economic growth. First, defining given terms such as Keynesian multiplier, government spending, and short-term economic growth would be good enough to fill out the introduction. In body 1, you can focus on analyzing theoretical ideas of Keynesian multiplier. First, by explaining the concept of marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save, and then the way that spending multiplier is calculated and applied by using the concept of both. And you can finish with the idea that when there is an injection of government spending, how it functions as a booster. Next, in body 2, there can come practical analysis of Keynesian multiplier. You can further explain when a country's economy is in recession, there should be a recessionary gap that requires AD increase. And then you can explain how the initial government spending further boosts private sector spending, such as private consumption and investment. And ultimately, how it results in a larger increase in real GDP than the initial increase in government spending. As you can see, a diagram showing the AD shifting to the right due to the initial government spending, and another shift in AD due to the multiplier effect, all can illustrate the explanation that I just did. So we can say that the diagram shows the result of bigger increase in real GDP, pushing it closer to the full employment level of GDP. B, using real-world examples, evaluate the view that high economic growth rates can only be achieved at the expense of other macroeconomic objectives. As you can expect, you can start this essay with the definitions of economic growth and other macroeconomic objectives. First, in body 1, the discussion can present a few ideas that agree with the view. Since there are multiple macroeconomic objectives that have conflict with this goal, you can explain the details of such, like the conflict between economic growth and low inflation, and the conflict between economic growth and equity, not to mention the one between economic growth and environmental sustainability. Such can be illustrated with a diagram showing AD curve shifting to the right, showing economic growth at the expense of high inflation. And one real-world example I would use is about the United States, which is definitely the richest country in the world. But in 2023, according to the country's Gini coefficient, the country's household income distribution was 0.47. This figure was at 0.43 in 1990, which indicates an increase in income inequality in the US over the past 30 years. Next, the discussion can go further to talk about the disagreement to the view. It can be started by explaining the case where economic growth can actually be achieved along with other macroeconomic objectives, such as long-run and sustainable economic growth can lower inflation, and higher economic growth would bring higher employment. Also, higher economic growth allows more government spending on welfare system, which can mitigate income inequality. On top of that, higher economic growth allows the application of green growth scheme. To illustrate, you can use diagrams showing long-run aggregate supply curve shifting to the right or PPC curve shifting to outward. Lastly, as a real-world example, you can think of some Northern European countries which are known to be both rich and relatively eco-friendly and relatively more equal. Specifically, I would use Norway, which stands out even among the Nordic countries with its highest GDP figures, and also the government uses green transition strategy to satisfy two different goals at the same time. You can check the rest of the details to resonate the idea. The last questions are from the Unit 4, Global Economy. A, explain how poverty may have a negative impact on sustainability. Defining poverty and sustainability would be enough for the introduction. And first, in body 1, you can focus on analyzing the negative impact that poverty would have on sustainable use of economic resources, such as what are the negative economic implications of having persistent poverty in a country. When a country suffers with poverty, it would inevitably lead to lack of education of the public and lower labor productivity and business incentives. And similarly, poverty causes poor nutrition and health, lowering labor productivity. Also, poverty-suffering countries' government lacks tax sources both from consumers and producers. Therefore, there can be persistent government budget deficit and lack of welfare spending. Not to mention the lack of infrastructure spending that can further hinder productivity growth and economic growth. All can be illustrated with a poverty cycle diagram. Next is about the negative impact that poverty can bring to sustainable use of environmental resources. You can explain what are the negative environmental implications of persistent poverty in a country. For example, when a country is in a state of persistent poverty, it often ends up overusing scarce common resources it has and exploiting natural capital rather than investing on high-value capital. Also, when it comes to considering the trade deals, countries in poverty tend to have worse terms of trade, draining their primary resources. Such can be illustrated with a negative externalities of consumption diagram showing the market failure of common pool resources. B, using real-world examples, discuss the strengths and limitations of government intervention as a strategy for promoting economic development. You can start your introduction with the definitions of economic development, government intervention, and interventionist supply-side policies. First, the body 1 can discuss the strength of interventionist policies. When it comes to stable economic development, government intervention facilitates long-term investment in human capital. These policies often emphasize education, training, which enhance the skills of workforce, leading to greater productivity and innovation. Also, government intervention enables infrastructure development and stimulate economic growth as a result. And government may fund or incentivize R&D, fostering innovation and potentially leading to new industries and technologies. On top of that, government intervention can drive sustainable economic growth by addressing structural issues rather than just the short-term demand fluctuations. You can use diagrams showing long-run aggregate supply shifting to the right and PPC the same. One real-world example I can recommend is about the UK government's funding scheme to support innovation and technological advancement, particularly in industries like artificial intelligence, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing. The aim is to increase the long-term productive capacity of the economy by fostering innovation. 42 is about the limitations of interventionist policies. It can start with explaining a few limitations of them. Government inefficiency is one that should be noted, since it can lead to bureaucratic inefficiencies where programs may be poorly managed or fail to deliver its outcome intended, since it can be politically motivated. Also, it's high cost too. The financial burden of government-funded initiatives can lead to increased public debt or higher taxes, which may affect overall economic growth. Also, interventions might distort market signals. Similarly, long-term reliance on government assistance can create dependency, discouraging business spirit. Alternatively, free market-oriented policies can be rather more effective. For example, by encouraging investment and deregulation, the government can create a favorable business environment through tax incentives, grants, or subsidies. These policies can attract both domestic and foreign investment. Such practice can be found from the country Estonia, which has long been a pioneer in digital innovation and economic liberalization. In the 2020s, it has continued to implement non-interventionist supply-side policies that emphasize market efficiency, low taxes, and minimal government interference in the economy. All right, this is the end of the paper 1 review. Following is paper 2. Question 1 is about the country UK, and we've got multiple text and data to understand its economic state. Question A1. Define the term recession indicated bold in the text. The term refers to a negative or for at least 2 consecutive quarters of real GDP falls in a country's economy. Question 2. Define the term portfolio investment indicated in bold in the text. It refers to the buying of financial assets, such as shares and bond savings, to gain a capital gain or interest, and such transaction is recorded in the financial account of the balance of payment in a country. Question B. A pharmaceutical good is priced at £5 per unit and the exported quantity is 1,000 units. The price decreases to £4. Using the price elasticity of demand figure for pharmaceuticals exported from the UK, calculate the revenue earned in the UK pound after the price change. The question asks us to calculate the PED with the given information. First, if you scroll up to text A, paragraph 6, it identifies the PED of the product, which is -6. And from the information above, we can calculate the percentage change of the prices from 5 to 4, which is -20%. Then we now can get the value of the percentage change of the quantities, which is 12%. What we should calculate is the after quantity due to the price change. Then we can get the value of revenues by doing this. So the answer is this one. Using information from Table 2, calculate the balance of trading goods for the UK in 2021. Table 2, we can check the data for the current account balance, including goods, services, income, and current transfers. So the year 2021, we know the sum of all as -60, as the question said. So we can simply get the value that we want, is -156. Using an ADAS diagram, explain the likely effect on the UK's real GDP of higher interest rates. According to the text, it says the BOE raised the interest rate, which is a type of contractionary monetary policy. And it will increase the cost of borrowing and increases the return to saving. So it will lead to less consumption investment and therefore reduces AD, which decreases real GDP, as you can check from the diagram. D, using an exchange rate diagram, explain the likely effect on the exchange rate for the pound of increased international demand for green goods produced in the UK. The given text says that there is an increased foreign demand on UK green goods, and it means that UK's exports are increasing along with the demand for the pound, since foreigners purchase the UK product with British currency. This would lead to a rise in the exchange rate and currency appreciation as illustrated in the diagram. E, using an international trade diagram, explain how imports of agricultural goods to the UK are likely to change as a result of the free trade agreement with Australia and New Zealand. As mentioned in the text, the FTA deals with Australia and New Zealand would lower tariffs on agricultural goods, and it will lower their price, making imports cheaper, thus reducing the level of domestic supply and increasing the quantity demanded, causing an increase in imported quantities as much as the size of the Q1 and Q4, as you can find from the diagram. F, using an externalities diagram, explain why the output of fossil fuels moves closer to the social optimum when subsidies are provided for the production of solar panels. As a result of the subsidy granted to solar panel producers, it can result in the fossil fuel market to consume closer to the socially optimal level. The reason is because fossil fuels demand, which is an alternative source of solar panel energy, is likely to decrease due to the cheaper price of the solar energy that is subsidized. And ultimately, it will move the fossil fuel market output towards the socially optimal level output, which is lower than the free market output level, as you can check from the diagram. G, using information from the text, data, and your knowledge of economics, discuss the likely effects of the exchange rate trend from 2011 to 2022 on the UK balance of payments and the UK economy. For this essay, one easy way to start introduction is to put some general introduction of the country's economic data or issue. And along with that, you can write down some definitions of key terms such as depreciation and exchange rate. Lastly, for this question specific, you can identify the country's overall currency trend, which keeps downwarding, recording depreciation. First, the discussion can focus on the positive effects of depreciation for the UK economy. As you can find evidence from the given text and data, depreciation has probably attracted inward FDI due to the improved competitiveness of exports. Also, depreciation may also result in increased inflows of portfolio investment since the UK stocks and bonds become cheaper. So this would provide some funds for UK investment, increasing output. Thirdly, depreciation of the exchange rate makes export prices lower in foreign currency terms. Therefore, it would contribute to increased AD and consequently GDP. Lastly, depreciation could help increase the UK exports of green goods, contributing to the success of the net zero strategy. Moving on to the next discussion point, it is about the negative effects of depreciation. You can say that unlike the theoretical expectation, the country seems to be out of the expected trend. So even if the currency is consistently depreciated, the trade deficit, according to the table 2, the deficits have widened. And consistent depreciation may deplete the foreign reserves of the country, which are currently already low. Also, the UK's market share for many exports is falling, indicating that trade has grown more rapidly in other countries. Also, what is noticeable is that depreciation may do little to improve employment and economic growth. So perhaps changes in the income of trading partners and quality of exports would have a more significant impact on growth and employment. unemployment. And depreciation will increase import prices, which will add to inflationary pressure in the economy. All above can be used to discuss the pros and cons of persistent depreciation. And the conclusion is not necessary, but if you have time, do write a few words to summarize your discussion. Question 2 is about the country, the Philippines. And just like the first question, we've got referable text and data to understand its economic state. Define the term remittances indicated in bold in the text. It refers to the transfer of money, specifically incomes by foreign workers sent back to their home country. Next, define the term expansionary fiscal policy indicated in bold in the text. Expansionary fiscal policy refers to a type of government policy done via increase in government expenditure or decrease in taxation to boost aggregate demand of a country. Question B1. Using information from Table 5, calculate the value of import of goods and services into the Philippines in 2022. It asks us to calculate the unknown value, which is again pretty simple, since we know the GDP and the rest of the data that is needed to get the GDP except the value of import. So we can get the value in this way. Pretty simple. B2. Using information from Table 5, calculate the value of net income from abroad in the Philippines in 2022. Since GNI is calculated by summing up GDP and net income from abroad, in this case, we know GDP and GNI, so this should be the answer. A middle-income household in the Philippines earned 4,000 Philippines peso in 2021. Its weekly income increased to 4,200 in 2022. Its weekly demand for rice decreased from 4 to 3.9 between the 2 years. Calculate the income elasticity of demand for rice for this household. For the YED calculation, we've got all the data, the incomes, the quantities, so we change them as percentage changes. So the answer is this one. C. Using an ADA's diagram, explain the likely effect on the Philippines' real GDP as a result of higher global energy prices. As the text explains, when there is a rise in the global energy prices, what is expected is that it will lead to higher production costs for the firms and leads to a decrease in production, causing short-run aggregate supply to decrease. Thus, the country's real GDP will fall. You can illustrate such with this diagram. D. Using an international trade diagram, explain how the government of the Philippines gains revenue by imposing a tariff on rice imports. When there is a new tariff imposed on imported rice, the tariff revenue that the Philippines government can collect would increase, since every rice imported to the country now should be tariff imposed. You can find the situation in the diagram below. E. Using a demand and supply diagram, explain what is likely to happen to the consumer surplus if the minimum price charged by private bus drivers is raised further above the equilibrium price. If the government puts a legal minimum price to the bus market that is higher than the free market price, the market demand will decrease, as we understand with the law of demand, and it will result in market excess supply. Thus, the consumer surplus will decrease. You can find the changed situation for the consumer surplus. F. Using a poverty cycle diagram, explain the likely effect of official development assistance on incomes in the Philippines. When there is more ODA provided to the country, it means that more foreign money inflows to the country as a form of investment in businesses and infrastructure, or more funds being given to citizens to improve health, education, and job training. Understandably, all can contribute to break the poverty cycle and lead to higher incomes and productivity of the country. G. Using information from the text, data, and your knowledge of economics, evaluate the policies used in the Philippines to reduce poverty and income inequality. As I said earlier, you can smoothly start the essay by putting some general introduction of the country's economic data or issue, and defining a few key terms such as poverty, inequality, and relevant government policies that are used in the country would work to finish the introduction. For this question specific, as there are multiple government policies mentioned in the given text, your discussion should focus on evaluating each policy's pros and cons. Obviously, you have no time and need to evaluate all the policies mentioned, so do keep in mind that the following is for the revision reference. So for the body one way to compose and categorize the multiple policies would be according to the characteristics of them. So I first made evaluation on demand-side policies. The first policy that the Philippines government enacted and I would like to evaluate is the policy that granted subsidies for farmers and also to the private bus drivers. This is one of the demand-side policies. As you can check the following ideas, you evaluate its pros and cons. Next, you evaluate the policy that put more spending on the public healthcare system, which is financed by indirect taxes on tobacco. Just like the first policy, you put some evaluation mentioning some pros and cons of this policy. Thirdly, there is a policy that increased the conditional cash payment. Do not forget to evaluate its pros and cons with references. Last demand-side policy to be evaluated is the policy that government increased its spending as a form of expansionary fiscal policies. You can finish your body one with its own pros and cons. Next, in body two, evaluation would focus on the supply side policies that the Philippines government conducts. First is the policy that removed quota on pork imports and other free trade measures due to the joining of ASEAN. You can check its pros and cons. And next is the policy that imposed tariffs on rice imports, which seems to be the counteracting measure from the policy above. Third is the policy that encouraging workers to shift from agriculture, fishing, and informal sector to the other growing sectors. Next is the policy that increased the spending on infrastructure and its pros and cons. Last is the policy that increased use of grants and loans received through ODA. And its pros and cons. And as always, I reckon conclusion is not necessary, but if you have remaining time, do write a few words to summarize your evaluation. Yes, then this is the end of paper 2. What's coming up is paper 3. All right, paper 3. Question 1 is about the economic situation of the country Chile. Question A1, using the information provided in table 1, calculate current account balance for the second quarter of 2021. Second quarter. So we know the values needed to calculate the current account balance, inflation, goods, services, income, and current transfers. This is the answer. Next question. The financial account balance for the fourth quarter of 2021 was $7,552 million. Using the information provided in table 1, calculate the change in reserve assets for the fourth quarter of 2021. Except the values that used for current account calculation, the remaining 4 would be all for financial account. And the question informs us the value of financial account as 7,552. So we can get the unknown value in this way. So the answer is this one, and there is a decrease in reserve assets. Question 3. Using figure 1, calculate the change in domestic spending on salmon in Chile as a result of the increase in the world price of salmon from 520 to 840. So you can say that the revenue, so the price used to be this much, but now it is increasing this much. So yeah, so that's the domestic spending. Next, using figure 1, calculate the price elasticity of demand for salmon in Chile when the world price increases from 5.20 to 8.40 per kilogram. For PED calculation, we should know the percentage changes of price and percentage change of quantities. So considering the information that we have, we can transform them as percentage changes, and the PED is this one. Question 5. Using figure 1, calculate the social and community surplus after the price change. So you can find the changed consumer surplus after the price change. Now its consumer surplus is going to be this much. And the producer surplus as a result of the world price change would be supply this much big. So if you sum these two, it's the social surplus. So this is the answer. Next, using an international trade diagram, explain how an export subsidy could be used to increase the quantity of salmon export from Chile. Understandably, provision of export subsidy will increase the price that exporters will receive per unit exported. Therefore, the incentivized exporters would increase the quantity of exports from Q1 to Q4. Next, define the term common access resources. Common access resources are the ones from nature which have the characteristics of being non-excludable but rivalrous, often resulting in overconsumption of them. 8. Using an externalities diagram and the information provided, explain how salmon farming in Chile can result in market failure. You can use either of these two. Since the production of salmon has negative effect on other users of the ocean, so it can represent a negative production externality. But at the same time, it can be the consumption side as well, since it can be harmful to the health of the consumers, as therefore the society has to bear higher social costs of such as health costs, etc. Therefore, ultimately, it can be the consumption side of the externalities as well. B. Using the text data provided and your knowledge of economics, recommend a policy which could be introduced by the government of Chile to address market failure in the salmon fishing industry. For this type of essay, you can start with a brief summary of the country's economic data, and then you can identify the main issue that shall be discussed in this essay. Last, you introduce a policy that you recommend to address the issue identified above. For me, I would recommend the provision of subsidies to support the introduction of alternatives to antibiotics. You can fill out your body 1 content talking about your logic behind recommending the policy. First, you can argue that considering the fact that salmon is Chile's most important food export, regulation or taxation, such kind of regulation policy can have much more negative economic impact. And being seen from the long-term sustainability of salmon fishing industry, what seems to be the most reasonable is to subsidize the alternatives of the current one, since the current one creates concerning negative externalities, as we can find the reference from the text. Also, subsidizing the alternatives of the chemicals can not only contribute to make the salmon fishing eco-friendly and economically sustainable, but also it can minimize the negative impacts that make some indigenous people in local communities suffer. Next, you can write down a few potential concerns on your policy recommendation, like some kind of limitations. Predictably, there can be potential resistance from big salmon farms towards alternative chemicals, and government budget spending has high opportunity cost. Also, there is a difficulty of measuring the effectiveness of the subsidy, not to mention the time lags. As always, conclusion can be a quick few words to summarize your main idea, which is not necessary. Moving on to question 2. A1. Using information in table 2, calculate the real GDP per capita in Turkish lira in the country 2021. So to get the real GDP per capita, I have all the data I need, GDP, deflator, use them to calculate the real GDP, and then per capita divided by the population. So here comes the simple answer. Question 2. Using the information from table 2, calculate the country's rate of inflation for 2022. So by using CPI data of 2 years, we can calculate the inflation rate. So it's done by new CPI minus old CPI divided by the old CPI multiplied by 100. So this is the answer. Next, using the information in table 3 to illustrate your answer, outline why GDP data is often presented with an adjustment of purchasing power parity. PPC allows the measurements that eliminates the influence of differences in price level and cost of living in two countries. For example, PPC can reflect the fact that the Turkey's price level and the cost of living is lower than that in the United States. Using information in table 4, explain one reason why an increase in real GNI per capita might have a positive impact on living standards, and one reason why it might have a negative impact. Let's talk about the positive first. If there is an increase in GDP per capita, it means there should be an increase in tax revenue of the country's government. Therefore, it's going to allow the government to spend more for the merit goods, such as welfare spending. Therefore, it's going to lead to an increase in living standards. You can find the improving trend of life expectancy and schooling indicator from the table. On the other hand, for the negative, increase in GNI per capita may result in higher level of pollution due to more economic activity, such as industrial development or something. So you can check the increasing carbon dioxide emission data from the table. Question 5. Outline why there is concern over the central bank's monetary policy. A reduction in the rate of interest rate will lead to a foreign demand for the currency, causing depreciation, which will turn result in higher further inflation. And the thing is, the country is already in a quite high inflation state. That's why it can be pretty concerning. Question 6. Using an exchange rate diagram, explain how a relatively high rate of domestic inflation is likely to affect the exchange rate for Turkish lira. Presumably, the high rate of domestic inflation will make the country's exports less competitive, resulting in a decrease in demand for the country's currency to purchase the country's exports. Therefore, there should be a lower exchange rate for the currency, which is depreciation. Next, the price of a Turkish carpet exported to Italy in August 2022 was 120,000 Turkish lira. Using the information in table 5, calculate the price of the carpet in euros. Assume no indirect tax has been added. To get the value, you use the data given. First, the price in terms of the Turkish lira transformed into the exchange rate with euro in August 22. So you divide one with the other, so you get the value. Next, calculate indirect tax collected on the sale of a more valuable carpet sold for euro. The price 11,316 euros in Italy. To calculate the value, you use the tax rates and the tax added rates. And this way you can get the tax amount. Question B. Using the text data provided and your knowledge of economics, recommend a policy which could be introduced by the government of Turkey to reduce the rate of inflation in the country. You start with a brief summary of the country's economic data And then identify the main issue that shall be discussed in the essay. Last, you introduce the policy that you recommend to address the issue identified above. For this context, I would recommend a market-oriented supply-side policy, such as market deregulation, tax incentives, and trade deals. So body one would be about the rationale behind your policy recommendation. To confirm the policy recommendation, you can first explain that market-oriented supply-side policies aim to make the private firms do business in a more business-friendly environment without much government intervention and regulation. Therefore, it can result in higher investment, employment, and output production. Also, seen from the goal of fundamental economic growth, what's most needed is to boost the country's private business sector that can naturally attract foreign investment. And luckily enough, the text says that the country has a strong business culture with a large proportion of the population aspiring to be entrepreneurs. It has also benefited from supply chain constraints in other parts of the world, etc., etc. So it can be one logic. So you can argue that once such policies are well taken forward, the issues like foreign investors have sold their financial assets, such as bonds and stocks, the currency has depreciated, inflation rising sharply, these kind of a problem can be well alleviated. Moreover, according to the text, the country reported huge budget deficit for the year 2022, which is quite a big increase compared to the previous year. Therefore, in that regard, further government spending increase would not be desirable. That's why my policy recommendation can be more convincing. Next, I can put some potential concerns on my policy recommendation, such as there can be unexpected external shocks that can affect the country's economy negatively, not to mention the time lags. Also, political instability. In other words, clarity on policy application is required to attract more business investment from the globe. However, the thing is, according to the text, the country's policy implementation is not that convincing to many foreign investors because, like, as we have seen from the example of the central bank's interest rate change or something, so these can be detrimental to conduct market-oriented policies. To finish the essay, a few words to sum up the main idea of the essay will be enough, as you already know. Yes, so this is the end of the paper 3 review. Thanks for watching. Good luck with your revision. Bye.